Welcome back to the Don't Pick the Scab podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce David E. Feldman, a multi-book author whose life story reads like one of his compelling mystery novels. David has authored 15 books, including his popular Dora Ellison mystery series and Hammer and Sharp mystery thriller series. But his greatest masterpiece might be his own transformation story. Over 31 years sober from addiction, David has battled and conquered cancer, depression, spinal issues, and that threatened paralysis, and numerous surgeries, all while building a successful creative career as an author, musician, and painter. What makes David uniquely valuable to our community of men over 40 navigating divorce is his mastery of turning life's darkest moments into sources of strength and purpose. Through his art and storytelling, David demonstrates that our greatest struggles can be our most powerful tools for healing and growth. He's living proof that it's never too late to rewrite your story. Welcome to the show, David. Tell us a bit about yourself. I got some questions for you.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and to speak to some of the folks who tune in. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1957, moved real early to Valley Stream, a suburb of New York City in western Nassau County. I was around some crazy, I was a happy little kid, really. And one of the things that I loved when I was a little kid was storytelling. My mother read me stories and I loved, they took me away. And when I got to about third grade or so, I started to get in trouble. I had a big mouth and I would say anything to anyone. And that got me in trouble with the authorities in school, the teachers, the principal, with my dad. I come from a generation where they didn't have Dr. Phil and Oprah. They had that boy needs a whooping. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And quite frankly, my dad, listen, a lot of what I want to talk about is trauma, early life trauma. And my dad had polio when he was 2, and he lost the use of his left leg and most of the use of his right leg. And he was a very little guy because his legs were undersized, and he took a lot of crap. He really took a lot of crap. He grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, poor as heck, and was a little guy, and he had to fight. And really what got him through things, and it's my theme here, is what can get you through things are things that you really love. And I love storytelling, and my dad was a jazz musician, and he loved music, and music helped him to transcend a lot of the trauma and the difficulty and the conflict of life. Jazz, and he did have a successful relationship. He met my mom eventually, but I think he had a lot of unhappiness early on with other relationships. Particularly, his dad was not very kind to him, and I don't think his dad liked having. They didn't say you're physically challenged back then. They didn't say you have a disability. They said, "Hey, my kid's a cripple." That's how they talked, and that's what the neighbor kids told me about my dad. And so he transcended his trauma, which was somewhat inspiring to me. And I used storytelling and other things and spirituality to transcend mine. But I'm not going to tell you it was easy. It was challenging. And as I told you earlier, our relationship sent me into a suicide attempt because I was into a lot of drugs early in life, and I'm clean and sober more than 30 years now, 31 and a half years. But there was a time that the pain was so great that the drugs wouldn't do it. They didn't cut it. And so I just thought the next right thing is to take myself out. And I'm delighted that didn't work out.
So you've been sober over 31 years. What was the turning point that made you decide to get clean? And how can divorced men apply that same mindset to their recovery?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly. So a big motivator in all of my life, I wasn't always aware of it, but a big motivator was the conflict I had with my dad. A boy wants to please his dad. I think it's part of when we're born, we want to please our dads. Things change as we get older, but I had a lot of conflict with my dad, and I caused a lot of it, and he had some of his own challenges, which probably didn't help much. But what happened was in 1985, I got into a relationship, which was eventually a very successful one. And I married that girl in 1987. We're together 40 years now. And what happened was, and this will take a minute to explain, but she had a sister. And in 1989, her sister had a baby, my nephew, Steve. and then she passed away. She had an aneurysm, and then she died. And I had never really thought about having kids. I spent my life getting high and doing whatever I felt like doing. That's how I lived. I did whatever I felt like doing. I really wasn't concerned about other people. I loved this girl because she was a nice girl. She took care of me. She took care of me when I was sick. But anyway, what really turned things around was when her sister died. We looked at each other and we said, you know what? Let's have kids. Now, our first son was born in 1990. And here's where it gets to your question. I was so proud to be a father. And yet I was using drugs. So who am I telling about my new son? A little guy with a hat on 35th Street where I bought my drugs. The bartenders over at O'Reilly's. And I got no problem with anyone drinking or using drugs. If you do that and you can handle it, that's none of my business. But I couldn't handle it. Anyway, so what happened was one day, and here I am, I'm proud to be a father, and yet I'm conflicted because I'm not doing the right thing, really. I'm not living well. So one day in 1991, my son is a year and a half old, a little over a year old, and I'm taking care of him, and I was high, and he got hurt. And that moment was the turning point. At that moment, because I wanted so badly to be a good father, it was so important to me, and because it was so obvious that I wasn't, I became willing at that moment to do anything to change that picture.
So he got hurt in your care?
Yes, I was taking care of him, and I was not acting in a responsible way. I just put it like that. And what happened was he got hurt, and there was blood all over the place. And he was okay eventually, but in the short term, it was awful. My little son is screaming. He's got blood all over him. I'm calling 911. It was just a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And I became willing in the bigger picture to change and to do something to change my life. Again, not to say that if, some listeners out there, they smoke a little weed or they do whatever they do, they have some drinks, none of my business. I'm not judging anyone. But for me, I had to change. And also for me, doing those things, I couldn't stop. I was one of these people that had to change because I couldn't stop. I would do those things to the detriment of the people I loved the most. And that's exactly what happened. And I became willing to do anything to change. And I found myself soon after that in a room full of people who were getting clean. In a room full of people in one of those rooms in one of those places where people are trying to get clean. And even then, I was trying to sound cool. I was trying to sound tough. I'm in a room of 80 people, and it looked like a biker convention. And it was 1991, and there was all these motorcycle guys. Now, I ride Harleys now, but I didn't then. And I was anxious. I had a lot of anxiety. I didn't know it, but I had a lot of anxiety, which eventually would manifest as depression. And I'm in the back row, and I'm looking around trying to be, whoa, yeah, I'm cool. I got it going on. And I'm telling the guy next to me, yeah, man, I got the virus. And the virus meaning HIV, because there are a lot of heroin users in that room. And I didn't have any virus. I was just trying to sound cool. So I'm sitting next to this guy, and I'm saying that stuff. Listen, how old was I then? I was pretty old. I was 34, and I had a new little baby. I didn't have my other son yet, and I'm trying to sound cool. And this guy, his name was Artie. He was sitting next to me, got very long hair and glasses, and he leans over to me. He says, "Listen, man, I've had the virus for 9 years, and I'm living with it. I'm not dying from it, and you should be listening to that guy up there." And he pointed to the speaker at the front of the room, which kind of pissed me off. But you know what? I started listening. And what I heard was my insides, my pain and fear and remorse and self-loathing and terror was coming out of that guy's mouth. And I had never thought there was anyone like me before. I thought there was me and there was the rest of the world. And I think that when you're going through a painful thing like a divorce where someone that you really loved, someone that you really adored, someone that was a piece of your heart, is stomping all over you, or it seems like that, at least in some situations, even if they're not, it might seem like that, to know that there's other people like you. And David, you're delivering that message that there's other people like you fellas out there. So at that moment, and it wasn't about a relationship or a divorce at that moment, it was just about pain that I couldn't stand being me. And I hear this speaker, and I hear the inside of my head is coming out of this guy's mouth, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And my whole life changed right then. And I never believed in anything. I wasn't going, this was if you know what I'm talking about, a faith-based situation. And I have no experience with faith-based anything. I was not raised by parents who believed in God. I'm still, I think, the only one in my family, at least from previous generations, who believes in God. I didn't believe in God at that point, and I'm not really here to talk about getting anyone to believe in God. It's none of my business what you believe or don't believe. But that changed my life. And I went down that was a fork, and I went down a different direction. And I can tell you about some people who I think had some things to say, or some things I learned along the way that might be helpful, that were helpful to me in difficult situations, that might be helpful to some of your folks here.
What were they?
Here's one. So I have pursued my creativity. And the most painful times in my life, I let art take me away. And whatever it is, it might be baseball. I'm sure there's people, if you talk to some of the greatest athletes ever, how do they deal with their pain? They lose themselves. Listen, I grew up, I'm a New York guy, and one of the first books, I love books, I read them and then I wrote them. One of the first books I ever read was a biography of Mickey Mantle. Okay, I'm a Yankees fan. Sorry to all you folks in Boston, but I am a Yankees fan. One of my kids, I was once at a 12-step meeting in Martha's Vineyard, and I was talking about being from New York and being a Yankees fan. No one said anything. They were very nice. And I said, my little son, who's just like me, who's a contrarian, who really goes against the grain, he's with me, and he's a Red Sox fan. And the room went bananas. It went... Anyway, one of the first books I ever read was a biography of Mickey Mantle. And he was a guy, he had his difficulties with relationships. He stayed married, but he cheated on his wife a lot. He was on the road. And when he was on the road, he was on the road. And he partied a lot, and he drank a lot, and he got sober like right before he died, I think, if I got that right. And I was a big fan of him. And my point is, people who love something, my question really, cutting to the chase, to your viewers, to your guys, is what do you love? Okay, what do you love? Mickey Mantle loved playing ball. And I can guarantee you that even on the days he was hungover and he came to the stadium and hung out with Billy Martin and Whitey Ford and all those guys, he loved stepping up to bat and switch hitting and hitting those long home runs. And before he stepped in that drain, he was the fastest guy, or one of the fastest guys the league had ever seen. I'm a big Mickey Mantle fan. Anyway, what do you love? So look, let me switch gears a little bit. I made a film, which I don't think you can find anywhere, called What Does It All Mean? It was about spirituality. I have it here somewhere, but here. And I'm not plugging it, but because you can't get it anywhere. But there's a piece of it. If you go to YouTube and you look up Eugene Morrow, Morrow, you'll find a piece of this film that I made with this guy. He was a guy, he retired. He lived in my town. He's passed away about 10 years now. But I made this film in 2008. And he was a guy, he lived in my town, begun living a spiritual life. He retired. He worked for the city. And when he retired, he didn't know what to do with himself, right? A little bit like some of our guys who might be going through a divorce because of pain, they don't know what to do with themselves. So he didn't know what to do with himself. And his wife said, and this is what I would ask you guys, what did you like to do when you were little? What did you always want to do? Because your divorce can be an opportunity. Your divorce can be an opportunity. What did you always want to do since you were little? You could do it. So his wife said that, and he said, what are you talking about? He said, okay, I'll tell you. I like to color. And she said, okay. She said, okay, you like to color. How about you learn to paint? So he started looking at books about paint. He didn't know. He worked for the city. He was, I don't know what he did, but he was a blue collar guy. So many of us. He worked 9 to 5. He had overtime. He retired with a pension. Anyway, but he was living a spiritual life in much the way I came to live a spiritual life after my son got hurt. Okay, because I became a spiritually focused person. I came to believe in something. I changed the way I live. So this guy started reading books about painting. He went to the art store and he brought one of the books, and he's laughing with the person at the art store saying, maybe I'll be another Van Gogh. And he bought all this paint stuff. And he said, what the heck? I'm going to try it. Let me tell you something. Watch the little piece about Eugene Morrow. He became a painter, and he painted like Van Gogh. I don't mean and he sold his paintings for a 4-digit number, not for $1 million, but he sold his paintings, and he wasn't in it to sell the paintings. So someone became his agent. Someone else that he and I both knew became his agent, and his whatever they were helped market him. But he was painting every day. And he eventually, I interviewed him about this while he's painting. You can see this piece, and there's no money in it for me or anything like that. But he's painting, and I'm asking him about it. And he says, my painting is like a prayer. It's like a prayer, the painting itself. And I said, how'd you learn? He said, it's what I always wanted to do. And I would always kind of pray. He was a big Jesus guy, and he would say, Jesus taught me how to paint. Jesus taught me how to paint. And that's not my background. I'm Jewish, and I admire Jesus, but that's not my thing. But that's how he looked at it, and he became a painter. And not to say that your guys, if they love sailing or they love rowing or they love hitting a baseball or they love art or they love wrestling or they love fishing. I know a guy came to me, another guy I know through this sort of spiritual avenue I took in Fork in the Road. He came to me, he said, Dave, I hear you're a writer. And I said, yeah, Dominic, yeah, I'm a writer. I write books. He said, that's what I heard. Can you write a book about fishing? I said, what do you mean? He said, I go fishing. This guy's been on disability for 40 years. He was in some kind of accident. He's been on disability. He said, I go fishing probably 6 times a week. I live where there's boats, there's docks. I live at the beach in Long Beach, New York. And he says, I go fishing all the time. And I know a little bit about fishing. I know how to make the lures. I know how to catch the fish. I know how to think like a fish. I said, I do ghost write. I don't do it anymore, but I used to ghost write. I write books for other people. They came to me. I had a website and so forth. I don't do it now. I write books for me, and I write books for God, quite frankly. That's what I do. I write books for God. And he said, I'd like you to, I'm going to tell you about fishing, and you're going to write the book. I said, you got to pay. I won't do it for free, man. I won't do it for free. But you know what? He was on disability, and I said to him, what can you do? What can you afford so it's not going to be painful? And we came up with a number, and he paid me that. And you know what? We wrote that book for 8 years because he kept he kept catching what he called pool fish. He'd be on these party boats, and he'd win the pool probably half the time. There'd be 40 guys on the boats, and he'd win about 50% of the pools because he could think like a fish.
Dang.
So we wrote this book, and it was all done, but he kept coming back to me and say, Dave, I don't know what to do. I want another pool. So I got to put that in. He would put the day and what happened and what they caught. Each pool fish would become another page. We ended up with a 230-page book, which you cannot buy because he will not sell it. He just made 50 copies of it, and he gave it to people for free. Guys from the party boats, and because he's on disability, and he's terrified that the disability police will catch him, and they'll take away his disability because that's how he lives. Whatever. But you know what? This whole thing was God's idea. And what do you guys want to do? What do you really want to do?
So I tell people, so 2 things you made me think about. I tell people, they ask, what's the best way to recover from a bad divorce? And I look at them and I say, start a podcast. And they look at me, I said, hey, I am 240 episodes in. And man, I've learned a lot about myself and others, but it's something that I've grown to love. You talk about what do you love? And I love meeting people like you and talking about podcasts, because every podcast I do, I always learn something. And that's the funnest part for me.
I do a lot of podcasts and I enjoy them. Listen, I like talking about me. It's my favorite subject.
No.
Aren't you? If you tell people, start a podcast, you can have all this competition.
Nah, there's plenty fish in the sea.
There's a lot of wealth. Yeah, there's a lot of wealth.
Oh, yeah, but I have fun. Like I said, I meet great people like you, and I learn something every time I podcast. And I've done, between the 2 podcasts, I've done over 300. And I've only had one go off the rails. And it was just a piece of crap. And I was so pissed, I went ahead and published it because I said, you made me pull shit out of you, so you're going to pay. So I put it online, and I hated it, but I said, hey, what the hell? So you've overcome cancer, depression, spinal problems, multiple surgeries. Which challenge taught you the most about resilience and why?
Probably the depression. I had the depression. I probably had it my whole life. I had a lot of anxiety, and that's probably why I was using drugs. By the time I was by the time I was in eighth grade, I was high all the time. Eighth grade was about how old? Eighth grade, 12, 13 years old. So that was about 1969 or so. I was born in 57. So I had a therapist tell me that I definitely have ADD. I said, how do you know? She said, when you drink too much coffee, do you get frazzled or do you get focused? And I said, I get focused. And she said, you have ADD. And I said, okay, whatever. What are you going to do about it? In 2005. So let me back up, actually. I have depression in my family. I have suicides, several suicides in my family. Not immediate family, but in my family. And of course, like I said, I tried it. And thank goodness I wasn't very good at it because I'm very, very glad to be alive and I love my life. And by the way, I think, surviving trauma and pain is to count your blessings. It sounds pie in the sky stuff, but you know what? I can walk and I can see and I can hear and I can read and write and I got food in my refrigerator. I got $1 or $2 in the bank, not a ton, but a little bit.
Life is good.
Life is okay. It could be worse. And let me tell you something. When I had all these surgeries and cancer, if I was living, I don't know where, in Kabul or someplace, I'd be dead 5 times. Wherever you live in the United States, there's pretty decent care. And where I live in New York, I went right to Sloan Kettering when I had cancer. But the thing that really affected me the most, that was the most challenging, was the depression. Because, first of all, it was worse than all the other stuff. It was worse than the cancer. It was worse after I had spinal surgery. They found air in my intestines, and you can't have air in your intestines. And they took me lights and sirens to a hospital. And 3 days after a spinal fusion in my neck, where I was going to be paralyzed, a piano player, as you could probably see, and I played piano at steak and sushi joints in the Hamptons, and I couldn't play piano. So I ended up having this surgery. 3 days later, I couldn't pee, and you got to pee. So I went to a 24/7 24/7 urgent care, and they gave me the catheter, which wasn't fun. And they gave me a PET scan, and they said, dude, we got to send you to the hospital on an ambulance because you got air in your intestines and you need surgery now. And I had to have a resection of my intestines. And and the surgeon, who's this wonderful man from Haiti, who does surgeries in Haiti for free, he said, I'm going to cut a piece out of your intestines and you might wake up with a bag. And I said, wait, what? He said, yeah, you might wake up with a colostomy. And I did. And that was brutal. That was awful because it's mutilation. I'm pooping out my stomach all of a sudden, right? That was terrible. But the depression was the worst thing. It was like everything was too loud, too bright, too intense. And I had to sit in a dark room for 6 weeks. So we have depression in my family. And I have someone very close to me who I love very much in my family, who I never understood, because she would talk about this stuff and I'd be like, yeah, but come on, everything's fine. Look around, everything's fine. And she would go, no. So when I got sick with this thing in 2005, I went like this. I went, oh, I understood her all of a sudden. Because if you don't have it, you don't get it.
Yeah,
okay?
nope.
If you've never had it, you don't understand. All of a sudden, I called her and I was like, I'm so sorry. I get it now. I totally get it. Because it's like you're in this hole and you're trying to get out of this hole to sanity. To sanity. You're crazy. You feel like you're not even human. And the wall of the hole you're trying to get out of is made of ice. And you keep sliding down. That was terrible. It was terrible. And I did certain things, and every now and then I start to get sick. I start to get a little bit of it. The medical community has really helped me, by the way, really helped me with this stuff, all of these things. But if I get this, first of all, I'm married to a great girl. So one of the answers, when you said, what do you do when you have a terribly painful divorce? I thought you were going to say you start dating.
I did that.
I don't know if that's the right answer. I have a friend who's going through something like that.
David,
Okay. Okay. Maybe becoming friends with a woman could be the right. I don't know. Listen, I have not walked in those shoes, so I can't. I've been very lucky. I was in terrible relationships until I was 35. Okay. Until I was 33. That's when I met my wife. I was in terrible relationships. They were physical. Well, they were terribly painful.
So at what point did you realize that your pain could become your purpose because you switched to fit the script? And how can recently divorced men start to see their struggles as a potential source of strength?
By doing what you do, first of all, by helping others. There's nothing like, look, the worst thing that ever happened to me really was when my son, who I was so proud to be a father, when he got hurt. Okay. And the fact that I lived 22 years up to then, that I was hammered every day. I was really high. My goal in life was to be as high as I could all the time. Now I spend 6 hours a week hosting something online that helps people. There's 200 people there all the time. I spend 6 hours a week. I'm going to do it tomorrow afternoon, 2 hours. I'm going to be there. I'm just a guy who's been clean a long time, who's being helpful. Dave F. That's it. I do that. Help it. There's nothing like helping others. And it could be your friend. Look, there's catharsis in art. Maybe you're a musician. Maybe you play guitar. I write about it. I give my main character, Dora Ellison, in the first book, survived childhood trauma. She watched her father beat the crap out of her mother. And she's become like this Jack Reacher type person where she sees people abusing other people. She does something about it. And I enjoy writing that stuff. And I don't know if anybody in your audience likes to read mysteries, but I'm going to plug mine for a quick second and just say Dora Ellison and Hammer and Sharp. Hammer is a Jewish mob boss. I liked writing about tough Jews because where I lived, Jews were on the receiving end. And in history, a lot of them were on the receiving end. So I like a Jewish dude with a machine going Shabbat Shalom and the effer. I like that. And Sam Sharp is a private eye, like a Humphrey Bogart type private eye, who's a heroin addict, and he's struggling to get over his heroin. And anytime he gets involved in a mystery, the heroin addiction comes alive and tries to take over his brain, and he's got to fight that. That's catharsis for me. I write about all this trauma and people who've been in bad, painful relationship. This woman, Dinah Hammer, she's raped repeatedly, and she goes and she takes care of the dude. So if there's some way, listen, maybe some of you guys go to the shooting range and they can imagine somebody over in that target that they're shooting at. Or maybe they can go bowling and they can picture somebody's face over on those pins. There's all kinds of dartboards. There's a lot of ways to take aim at your pain. And it could be through doing things you love. It could be through art. It could be through sports. It could be through helping someone. It could be through prayer. It could be through going to church and meeting people at church. It could be through creativity. It could be through violence in a video game where you're not really hurting anybody, but you're getting it out.
Man, you just gave me the title. Take aim at your pain. Man, yeah. That sums it all up. David, my men have about a half hour, kind of 31 minutes. They have about a half hour attention span. Where can they find you on the internet?
Okay, very simple. David E. Feldman, just like that. And the E is important. David E. Feldman, author.
Now, can they find the one group you said through there, the 200 people, or is that different?
No, that's 12-step recovery.
Okay. All right.
That's recovery meetings. That's a whole other part of my life. Anyone wants to talk about that privately, they can contact you. You could send them to me. And if they're having drug problems, I could talk to them about that. Listen, I sponsor a guy in Egypt. Not that I'm so good, but I sponsor 7 or 8 guys. And if there's anyone with that issue, I would love to talk to them about it if they need help.
Sir, this has been a very interesting podcast. You never know what you're going to get. And the fact you don't like to hear yourself talk makes it hard.
I struggled through it, man. I struggled through it. It was really the computer stuff I got to struggle through.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I hope my men learned something. I have another podcast in 5 minutes. But hold on the line. Don't go anywhere. We're going to sign off. But thank you very much.